Hello and welcome back everyone. Today we're stepping into the bold and complex world of third-wave feminism which rose in the 1990s and carried into the 2000s. This brought intersectionality, identity politics and post-structuralist theory into feminism. Key voices: Rebecca Walker, Becoming the Third Wave; Naomi Wolf, The Beauty Myth; Judith Butler, Gender Trouble, Gender Performativity; Alice Walker Womanism in Search of Our Mother's Gardens; Bell Hooks, Ain't I a Woman; Audre Lorde, The Black Unicorn; Carol Bolt, Bread Emma; Mary Hyatt, The Way Women Write; Marge Piercy Woman, On the Edge of Time; and Chandra Talpade Mohanty, Feminism Without Borders. Fourth Wave Feminism, 2012 to present, uses digital activism movements like #MeToo to push gender justice, inclusivity, and global solidarity. Let's decode the moment when feminism broke its own boundaries. Third wave feminism, rising in the early 1990s as both a continuation and a critique of the second wave. This wave pushed back against what younger feminists saw as the exclusionary focus of the second wave, centered mostly on white, upper middle class women. It also answered a cultural backlash that tried to roll back earlier gains. Third wave feminism brought a new focus: pluralism, inclusivity, and intersectionality. Gender in this wave is not fixed. Influenced by post-structuralist theory, third wave thinkers see gender as fluid, performative, and socially constructed. That means it's not just male or female, it's created and recreated through repeated actions, social norms, and personal expression. Third wave feminism also embraced the idea of micropolitics, examining how everyday choices, cultural symbols, and even fashion carry complex gendered meanings. And unlike the second wave's universal prescriptions, this wave asked, is any act inherently feminist? Or does it depend on who's doing it and in what context? The intellectual seeds were planted in the mid-1980s, but the movement crystallized in the 1990s through the work of feminists of color and queer theorists. Key names here include Gloria Anzaldúa, Bell Hooks, Cherry Moraga, Audre Lorde, Chela Sandoval, Louisa Akati, and Maxine Hong Kingston. A landmark text of this period is This Bridge Called My Back, writings by radical women of color, edited by Cherry Moraga and Gloria Anzaldúa, which directly challenged white feminist dominance. Now pause here. One of the most important intellectual moments came in 1989, when legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw introduced intersectionality. She showed how overlapping identities, race, gender, class, sexuality combined to produce unique forms of oppression. This concept became the cornerstone of third-wave feminism. Post-structuralist feminist Judith Butler, in Gender Trouble, Feminism and the Subversion of Identity, 1990, argued that gender is performative, created through repeated actions and societal expectations, destabilizing any fixed identity. Meanwhile, Patricia Hill Collins, in Black Feminist Thought, Knowledge, Consciousness, and the Politics of Empowerment, 1990, explored how Black women's lived experiences and intellectual traditions challenge dominant power structures and offer new feminist epistemologies. Writers like Bell Hooks, Alice Walker, Himani Banerjee, and Lee Maracle deepened the critique, ensuring that feminism included the perspectives of racial, ethnic, and cultural minorities long excluded from mainstream agendas. Third-wave feminism resists one single story. Instead, it offers a mosaic, many voices, many truths. It's a feminism that refuses to flatten identity and instead embraces complexity, seeing power and resistance not as uniform but as deeply interconnected. Now, let's decode the woman who named a movement Rebecca Walker, an American writer, activist, and cultural critic, widely recognized as one of the foundational voices of third-wave feminism. In 1992, Walker published the now historic article Becoming the Third Wave in Miss Magazine. Here she formally coined the term third wave and issued a generational call to action. In words that would echo through feminist history, she declared, "I am the third wave." This was more than a slogan, it was a challenge to expand feminism beyond the essentialism of the second wave, embracing intersectionality and activist engagement that addressed not only gender but also race, sexuality, and class. Walker's activism was as tangible as her words. She co-founded the Third-Wave Fund, which later became the Third-Wave Foundation. Its mission? To empower young women of color, queer, intersex, and trans individuals, providing leadership tools, resources, and funding for community-based activism. This wasn't theory on paper, it was feminism in action, building platforms for voices often excluded from mainstream agendas. Her impact was recognized early. In 1994, Time magazine named her one of the 50 future leaders of America, underscoring her influence in reshaping feminist priorities for a younger, more diverse generation. Walker's writing has appeared in The Washington Post, The Huffington Post, Salon, Glamour, and Essence, showing her unique ability to bridge academic theory, grassroots activism, and popular culture. Her voice continues to push for a feminism that is dynamic, inclusive, and resistant to becoming static or exclusionary. By naming and shaping the third wave, Rebecca Walker didn't just add a chapter to feminist history. She catalyzed a movement committed to complexity, intersectional justice, and the empowerment of all marginalized identities within the feminist framework. Let's discuss one of the most provocative books in modern feminist thought, Naomi Wolf's The Beauty Myth: How Images of Beauty Are Used Against Women, published in 1991. This was the book that positioned Wolf as a central voice in third-wave feminism, and it struck a nerve worldwide. Wolf's argument is deceptively simple, yet deeply unsettling. Just as women have gained more power, visibility, and opportunities in politics, work, and education, the media and commercial culture have intensified pressure on women to conform to unrealistic, unattainable beauty standards. This isn't harmless, it's a form of social control. Wolf warns that this beauty myth keeps women preoccupied with their appearance, draining time, energy, and confidence that could otherwise fuel their professional, creative, and political pursuits. Pause here and think this is the golden trick of patriarchal adaptation. When old barriers fall, new ones appear. And these new ones are often disguised as personal choice, fashion, or self-care, when in fact they can lead to destructive cycles, eating disorders, body dysmorphia, and chronic insecurity. Wolf's work hit a cultural nerve. Gloria Steinem and Betty Friedan praised it as an urgent feminist text, while others like Camille Paglia criticized it for oversimplifying the issue. That tension only amplified its reach, making the beauty myth both a rallying cry and a lightning rod for debate. Wolf's career didn't stop there. In The End of America, 2007, she examined threats to democracy, and in Vagina, a new biography, she explored the complex connections between female sexuality, neurology, and empowerment. Across her works, one theme remains constant: her determination to link the female body to broader struggles for freedom, dignity, and self-definition. So, the next time you encounter an image, ad, or ideal telling you what beauty should look like, pause and ask Naomi Wolf's question: who benefits when women doubt themselves? Let's decode one of the most influential and challenging voices in contemporary feminist and queer theory, Judith Butler. Philosopher, theorist, and cultural critic, Butler has reshaped how we think about gender, identity, and power. Joining the faculty at the University of California, Berkeley in 1993, Butler has resisted the label postmodernist, but remains firmly committed to feminist inquiry. Their most important works, Gender Trouble, Feminism and the Subversion of Identity 1990, and Bodies That Matter, On the Discursive Limits of Sex 1993, introduced the now famous concept of gender performativity. Pause here and note this: Butler's central claim is that gender is not a stable identity or inner truth. Instead, it is, in their words, performatively constituted by the very expressions that are said to be its results. This means that the subject does not pre-exist the act, as Butler writes. Gender is always a doing, though not a doing by a subject who might be said to pre-exist the deed, asked in exam. In Gender Trouble, Butler critiques feminism for sometimes treating woman as a fixed ahistorical category. This, they warn, risks reinforcing the very binary gender system feminism seeks to dismantle. Instead, they urge feminists to focus on providing an account of how power functions and shapes our understandings of womanhood not only in the society at large but also within the feminist movement. Drawing from Freud, de Beauvoir, Kristeva, Lacan, Irigaray, Monique Wittig, Derrida, and Foucault, Butler shows that gender and desire are flexible, free-floating, and not caused by other stable factors. This insight helped lay the foundation for queer theory, which views identity as fluid, contingent, and constructed through discourse and repetition. Butler makes it clear that performativity is not just choice. In Bodies That Matter, they respond to critics who misunderstood performativity as voluntary role-playing. Using Derrida's concept of iterability, Butler argues that gender is produced through repetition, ritualized acts, gestures, and norms that continually cite existing cultural codes. These performances create the illusion of a stable identity, but that stability is always fragile and open to disruption. In this way, performativity is both regulatory and subversive, bound by historical discourse, yet always capable of being reworked. This is why Butler's theory continues to influence gender studies, literary theory, psychoanalysis, and cultural criticism. And their body of work extends far beyond these two classics. Key titles include Performative Acts and Gender Constitution, 1988, Imitation and Gender Insubordination, 1991, Excitable Speech, 1997, Precarious Life, 2004, Undoing Gender, 2004, Giving an Account of Oneself, 2005, and Notes Toward a Performative Theory of Assembly, 2015. Judith Butler's work challenges us to see gender not as something we are, but as something we do, and in that doing we have the power to disrupt, resist, and redefine the norms that shape us. Let's take on the voice of a writer who gave feminism a richer, more inclusive vocabulary, Alice Walker. Novelist, poet, short story writer, and activist Walker is one of the most important figures in African American literature and feminist thought. Her novel, The Color Purple, published in 1982, made history. It became the first African American novel to win the Pulitzer Prize for fiction. But alongside her fiction, Walker's essays have been equally transformative for feminist theory. In 1983, she published In Search of Our Mother's Gardens, Womanist Prose, a collection of 36 essays, articles, reviews, and speeches written between 1966 and 1982. Here, Walker introduced a word that would change feminist discourse, womanist. She defines it as a black feminist or feminist of color, a term that challenges mainstream, white-centered feminism by grounding itself in the lived realities of black women. Walker explains that womanism gives us a word of our own, reclaiming language and cultural identity from within black folk traditions. And here's her most famous metaphor: womanist is to feminist as purple is to lavender, asked in exam. It's a brilliant way to show kinship related but deeper, richer, and distinct. Pause here and note, womanism in Walker's vision isn't just about gender justice. It values emotional, sexual, and spiritual expression. It's committed to the survival and wholeness of entire communities, men and women alike. This is feminism expanded into a philosophy of cultural healing and collective care. The essays in Search of Our Mother's Gardens move across topics: nuclear disarmament, anti-Semitism, the civil rights movement, but always circle back to the cultural legacies of women, especially black women whose art, music, storytelling, and survival strategies have shaped history. Walker reminds us that these gardens are not only literal spaces but metaphors for creativity, resilience, and continuity. Through womanism, Alice Walker carved out a critical space for black women's voices in feminist theory. She showed that activism can be rooted in love, in historical memory, and in the care of entire communities, not just individual liberation. Can we discuss now the voice of a woman who reshaped how we understand race, gender, and class bell hooks? Born Gloria Jean Watkins, she chose her pen name in lowercase to honor her great-grandmother and to de-emphasize individual ego. Over her career, she published more than 40 works, theoretical essays, memoirs, poetry, children's books, all anchored in one conviction. Oppression is never singular. It is always intersecting. Her groundbreaking book, Ain't I a Woman? Black Women in Feminism, published in 1981, laid the foundations for black feminist thought. In it, Hooks exposed how the convergence of race, gender, and class oppression shapes the lives of black women in ways mainstream feminism often failed to acknowledge. This was Intersectionality in Practice, developed contemporaneously with Kimberlé Crenshaw's legal articulation, but grounded in cultural critique. Pause here and note Hooks didn't stop with one book. She followed with Feminist Theory, From Margin to Center, 1984, All About Love, New Visions, 2000, and We Real Cool. Black Men and Masculinity, 2004. Across these works, she dismantled systems of domination, whether in politics, media, or education, showing how they reproduce themselves unless actively challenged. Now here's the golden trick. Hooks also revolutionized film and visual culture studies. In her 1992 essay collection Black Looks, Race and Representation, she introduced the concept of the oppositional gaze. She reminds us that during slavery, black people could be punished for looking directly at their masters. This made looking an act of political resistance. The oppositional gaze, she argues, is a form of defiance, a conscious way of seeing that disrupts the white supremacist, phallocentric narratives dominating mainstream cinema. This gaze doesn't just critique, it creates. It fuels independent black cinema made by and for black audiences, resisting commodification and the othering of blackness. Drawing from Michel Foucault's ideas on power relations, Hooks also critiques the male gaze not only in traditional film theory but also in white feminist frameworks. She urges a reconceptualization of looking that includes the shared gaze, repressed gaze, phallocentric gaze, black male gaze, and interrogating gaze. Through these layered perspectives, bell hooks expanded both feminist theory and film theory, amplifying black women's voices and pushing for radically inclusive, liberatory representation. Her work remains a call to action, a reminder that how we look and how we are looked at is never neutral. Let's decode the voice of a poet who refused to separate the personal from the political Audre Lorde. In her own words, she was black, lesbian, mother, warrior, poet, people, the pare, and each of those identities shaped her life's work. She stood at the intersections confronting racism, sexism, classism, and homophobia, and turned those battles into literature that continues to inspire feminist, queer, and anti-racist movements. Her early poetry, like Cables to Rage, 1970, marked the first time she openly expressed her lesbian identity in art merging personal pain with collective resistance. Collections such as From a Land Where Other People Live, 1973, New York Head Shop and Museum, 1974, and Coal, 1976, gave voice to urban alienation, social violence, and emotional truth. Pause here and note her most celebrated collection, The Black Unicorn, came in 1978. Here, Lorde reached deep into African mythological imagery and matrilineal symbolism, reclaiming ancestral power and affirming her role as both daughter and mother. This was poetry as both spiritual reclamation and political act, resisting erasure and asserting the presence of black women's voices in the literary canon. Lord's prose is just as powerful. The Cancer Journals, 1980, and A Burst of Light, 1988, which won the National Book Award in 1989, turn her confrontation with illness into a political statement naming and surviving as acts of defiance. Her biomythography Zami, A New Spelling of My Name, 1982, blends memoir, myth and history to explore the mother-daughter bond and the shaping of a queer black identity. Her later collections, Undersong, Dilemma, Ani, Dilemma, Dilemma, Chosen Poems, Old and New, 1992, and The Marvelous Arithmetics of Distance, 1993, cement her as a poet of transgressive insight and transformative resistance. Let's step into a theatre where history is not just retold, it's reclaimed. Carol Bolt, a Canadian playwright and committed feminist, used the stage to give voice to women history tried to silence. Her most celebrated work, Red Emma, brings to life the radical spirit of Emma Goldman, an anarchist, feminist thinker, and tireless critic of state repression. Pause here and note this isn't just biography on stage, it's feminist historiography in action. Bolt takes Goldman's life and frames it through the lens of second-wave feminist theatre, where the goal was not only to tell women's stories, but to challenge the patriarchal narratives that had erased them. Red Emma traces Goldman's battles for political activism, social justice, personal freedom, and against both gender oppression and authoritarian power. The dialogue and structure carry the urgency of political dissent, blurring the line between historical realism and theatrical provocation. Now, Bolt's drama doesn't just teach us about Goldman's convictions. It shows how political theatre can itself become an act of resistance, using the stage as a space where women's agency and revolutionary thought can't be silenced. Let's pause and imagine, what if all of women's literature was being graded with a male ruler? That's exactly the problem Mary Hyatt tackled in her influential book, The Way Women Write, 1977. Hyatt argued that for centuries male critics judged women's writing by masculine stylistic norms, measuring it against the tone, form, and themes common in male-authored texts. The result? Women's literary achievements were misread, undervalued, or dismissed. Here's the golden insight. Hyatt proposed that women's writing often has its own distinctive style, rooted in different social, psychological, and lived experiences. If we keep forcing it into the mold of male standards, we'll never see its true richness. Her work sits right alongside Elaine Showalter's gynocriticism, insisting that feminist criticism must read women on their own terms, free from the masculine bias embedded in traditional literary evaluation. Pause and note this down. Mary Hyatt's intervention is a foundational step in reclaiming women's literary voices and reshaping the very criteria of literary criticism. Picture this: your mind trapped in an institution, your voice dismissed as madness, and then a visitor from the future arrives with proof that a different world is possible. That's the premise of Marge Piercy's feminist science fiction classic Woman on the Edge of Time, 1976. Our protagonist, Consuelo Ramos, is a poor Mexican-American woman in New York, silenced by poverty, sexism, and psychiatric control. But the future she glimpses? It's revolutionary, no binary gender roles, no capitalist exploitation, no oppressive nuclear family structure. Here's the golden link. Piercy's vision draws directly from Shulamit Firestone's radical feminist text, The Dialectic of Sex, 1970, which called for the technological and social reimagining of reproduction and gender. In Piercy's utopia, labor is shared, children are raised communally, and gender identity is fluid. It's not escapist fantasy, it's a blueprint for feminist transformation, urging readers to question the systems we take for granted today. Pause and note this. Piercy's novel is celebrated for its intersectional critique of race, class, and mental health oppression, making it a cornerstone of feminist speculative literature. Imagine trying to build a feminist movement, but without borders, without the limits of race, class, or nation. That's the vision of Chandra Talpade Mohanty, a leading post-colonial and transnational feminist theorist. In her landmark Feminism Without Borders, 2003, Mohanty takes aim at Western feminism's universalizing habit, the tendency to treat women's experiences as the same everywhere. She rejects the colonial gaze that paints women in the global South as silent victims waiting to be saved. Pause and note, this Mohanty insists on political solidarity, not cultural charity. She calls for a feminism that listens to and is led by women in their own contexts. Her rallying cry, it is time to move beyond the marks who said they cannot represent themselves. They must be represented. Her work is intersectional to the core, linking global capitalism, imperialism, and gender oppression, while always centering women's agency. Alongside her solo work, she's co-edited critical volumes like Third World Women and the Politics of Feminism 1991 and Feminism and War 2008, each pushing the boundaries of feminist thought. Remember Mohanty as the theorist who shifted feminism from rescue to resistance, making transnational solidarity the heart of decolonial feminist practice. Picture this, it's the year 2012. A new wave of feminism rises, not in lecture halls or street marches alone, but in tweets, hashtags, blogs, and viral videos. This is Fourth Wave Feminism, tech-powered, intersectional, and global. Unlike earlier waves with a single rallying cry, this one is multivocal. The focus? Ending harassment, objectification, pay inequality, and gender-based violence, and doing it in real time, across borders. Social media becomes both the stage and the microphone, giving women control over their own stories told on their own timelines. Pause here, this is where hashtag activism enters. Campaigns like hashtag everyday sexism and hashtag MeToo become not just trends, but archives of lived experiences. Writers give this movement its voice. Rebecca Solnit's Men Explain Things to Me, 2014, popularizes mansplaining. Rhiannon Lucy Coslet and Holly Baxter's The Vagenda, 2014, takes aim at the media's toxic portrayals. Jessica Valenti's Sex Object 2016 turns personal into political, and Laura Bates's Everyday Sexism documents sexism in all its daily forms. Remember, Fourth Wave Feminism as the moment feminism went digital, intersectional, and unstoppable, breaking silence with every post, share, and click. So, in this session, we've explored nearly every key figure and idea from Third Wave Feminism. In our next session, we'll shift gears and dive into psychoanalytic feminism, unpacking how theories of the mind have shaped feminist thought.